Welcome to another episode of Cerebral Faith Live. I am Evan Minton, and today we're going to be continuing our survey of the primeval history. The primeval history is what scholars call Genesis 1 to 11, the opening chapters of the Bible leading up to the call of Abraham in Genesis 12. So far, we've looked at Genesis 1, Genesis 2, 3, 4, and 5. And today we're going to be starting with Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6 covers the Nephilim. What we're going to be talking about, what they were, who they were, and why they are important. And I'm going to, by the way,
this is a reminder. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. This is a reminder. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe.
You heard the lady. Like the video and subscribe. Like the video and subscribe. Hit that like button and get the YouTube algorithm to show my video to more people in their recommendations. So I'm going to start the timer now, and I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to hop into it. Genesis 6. What were the Nephilim? Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4 says, quote, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown," end quote. So here we have, as the prologue to the flood account, we have these sons of God seeing the daughters of men. They're attractive. They take as their wives any they chose. And then the Lord says, My spirit shall not abide in man forever. And then it goes on to talk about this group of people called the Nephilim who were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. So who are these Nephilim, and why they just seem to be so out of place in the narrative? What do they have to do with Noah's Ark and the flood upon humankind for depravity and all that? What does it have to do with anything? There are 4 major options in Christian scholarship today for identifying the biblical Nephilim. The first option is the angel-human-giant hybrids. The second is the descendants of Cain and Seth intermarrying. The third is they were Neanderthals. And the fourth are the Nephilim are warrior offspring of ancient divinized kings. Now that first option is angels. They go into they come into the world and they do the naughties with human women. And because you have human women and non-human men, angels, divine beings, commingling, you get freaks of nature, because that happens when you mix 2 different species. You mix a horse and a donkey, and you get a mule. And that's what the first option says, is that they are giants. They are quasi-divine beings. The second is that, well, I'll explain these as we go. But these are the 4 major options. Now, I'm going to tip my hand and say that I favor the first option, the angel-human-giant hybrids. The first line of evidence for this interpretation is that the phrase sons of God are most often applied to divine beings. For example, we got several instances here. Job chapter 1, verse 6, which says, quote, Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them, end quote. Job chapter 2, verse 1 says, quote, again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord, end quote. And Job chapter 38, verses 4 to 7 says, quote, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Or on what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? End quote. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 to 9 says, quote, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the people according to the number of the sons of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is allotted inheritance, end quote. Now there's a textual variant here, and I think the English Standard Version gets it right. That's not supposed to say according to the number of the sons of Israel. It is supposed to say according to the number of the sons of God. The New International Version uses sons of Israel. The English Standard Version and others say sons of God, and I think that those translations that say sons of God in Deuteronomy 32 get it right. But we have 4 clear cases where sons of God is referring to divine beings. Job 1 and Job 2, that's clearly a divine council setting. That's taking place in heaven, and God and Satan are having their conversation about Job. That's the context of those first 2 verses. And in Job 38, God asks, this is in the context of God's many, many, many rhetorical questions to Job. And God asks Job, who laid its cornerstone, the earth's cornerstone, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? In this 3rd verse, we have, let's see if I remember the name, Hebrew couplet parallelism, where you have like one line that expresses a thought, and then you have another line that expresses the exact same thought right underneath it. It expresses that exact same thought slightly differently. So we have when all the morning stars sang together, the first line, and all the sons of God shouted for joy, the second line. So the sons of God are the morning stars. They're stars, so they're divine. And as Michael Heiser says in his book, The Unseen Realm, quote, astral religion and solar mythology were common in the ancient world. The notion that stars were animate divine beings was part of Israelite thinking. The stars had names, Psalm chapter 147, verse 4, were created by God, Genesis chapter 1, verse 16, were thought of as a divine army, Judges chapter 5, verse 20, Isaiah chapter 40, 25 to 26, Daniel chapter 8, verse 10, and Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 to 9. The idea persisted well into the New Testament era, end quote. We also have Psalm 82 as a 5th example of where sons of God are being applied to divine beings. Psalm 82 says, quote, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Now here, we don't have the exact phrase, B'nai Ha-Elohim, sons of God, but we do have B'nai Ha, I think the Hebrew is El Elyon, sons of the Most High. Well, who's the Most High? Yahweh, God. So it's the same thing. Sons of God. You are God, sons of the Most High, all of you, in the divine council. Brian Godawa says on pages 50 to 51 of his book, When Giants Were Upon the Earth, The Watchers, the Nephilim, and the Biblical Cosmic War of the Seed, that, quote, so from this text, and he's saying this about Psalm 82, so from this text we see that God has divine counsel that stands around him, and it consists of gods who are judging rulers over the nations and are also called sons of the Most High, synonymous with sons of God. Because they have not ruled justly, God will bring them low in judgment and take the nations away from them. Sound familiar? It's the exact story of Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 to 9, and Isaiah chapter 24, verses 21 to 22. Isaiah chapter 24, verses 21 to 22. On that day, the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven, and the kings of the earth on the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in a pit. They will be shut up in a prison, and after many days they will be punished. One of the Dead Sea Scrolls written in the 1st century BC reinforces this ancient Jewish interpretation of Psalm 82 as punishment focused on the divine council of gods, with Satan as their chief, allotted judicial authority over the nations. The idea that the Bible should talk about existent gods other than Yahweh is certainly uncomfortable for absolute monotheists, but our received definitions of monotheism are more often than not determined by our cultural traditions, many of which originate in theological controversies of other eras that create the baggage of non-biblical agendas, end quote. Brian Godawa goes on to say, quote, in light of this theological fear, some try to reinterpret this reference of gods or sons of God in Psalm 82 as a poetic expression of human judges or rulers on earth, metaphorically taking the place of God, the ultimate judge, by determining justice in his likeness and image. But there are three big reasons why this cannot be so. First, the terminology in the passage contradicts the notion of human judges and fails to connect that term, sons of God, to human beings anywhere else in the Bible. Secondly, the Bible elsewhere explicitly reveals a divine council or assembly of supernatural sons of God that are judges over geographical allotments of nations that is more consistent with this passage. Third, a heavenly divine council of supernatural sons of God is more consistent with the ancient Near Eastern, A&E, worldview of the biblical times that Israel shared with her neighbors, end quote. Now, with regards to other gods in the Bible, Michael S. Heiser says, quote, I know how difficult it was for me to understand that some cherished notions about the word God were actually misconceptions. One was an idea that was dealt with in the last chapter of the book I'm quoting from, that the false gods of the Bible were only idols. Another notion that didn't conform to the reality of the text was that the word God is only a name, not just an ordinary noun. Because I thought God was exclusively the name of a personal being and a unique being at that, I tended to assign the attributes of that being, Yahweh of Israel, to the three letters God. When I came to realize that there were other GODs in a heavenly council, it seemed, and that's an important word, as though Yahweh was just one among equals. That bothered me. Yahweh is inherently distinct and superior to all other gods. Yahweh is an Elohim, a god, but no other Elohim, gods, are Yahweh. I'm not assuming that the last chapter answered all your questions about the divine council, though. I'm betting that many of you are like I was after first discovering what the inspired text really says, what the ancient worldview of Israel really assumed. You may still be stuck on the idea that there can only be one Elohim, since Yahweh is called Elohim so many times in the Bible. And if that's not true, you might be asking, then what is an Elohim? End quote. This is from the chapter, So What Exactly is an Elohim?, which is from the first draft of his book, The Unseen Realm. And we're going to revisit this when we get to the talk on Genesis 10 and 11 about this whole Deuteronomy 32 worldview with God allotting lesser gods to the nations when he divided up mankind and all that. We're going to get a lot more into this, a lot more in depth, but what we're going to be talking about in a few weeks has some touch points with what we're talking about tonight, and so that's why I decided to just briefly bring it up. Now, in his book, The Unseen Realm, Michael Heiser shows the different biblical usages of the term Elohim. The Bible is not polytheistic. It is not saying Yahweh is just one among equals. It is not saying that he is just one among a pantheon of gods, just like him. No, God. There's one God. There is one maximally great being. There is only one Elohim who is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, morally perfect, necessarily existent, triune, etc. There are many Elohim, but there's only one Elohim that has those superlative attributes: omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, moral perfection, etc. Other Elohim, other gods, lowercase g, they are created beings by God, and they may be very, very powerful, but they're not omnipotent. They may be very, very knowledgeable and wise, but they're not omniscient. They may have lived for a long, long time, but they're not eternal. They're not uncreated. And in these, as you can see in this list, here are the ways that the Bible uses the biblical. Here's the way that the biblical authors use the term Elohim. They use it of Yahweh, the God of Israel, thousands of times. For example, in Genesis chapter 2, verses 4-5, and Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 35. The members of Yahweh's council, Psalm chapter 82, verse 1 and verse 6. We just looked at that passage. The gods and goddesses of other nations, Judges chapter 11, verse 24, 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 33. Demons, the Hebrew also calls them Shadim, in, for example, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 17. The deceased Samuel, the spirit of the deceased Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 13. And angels, or the angel of Yahweh, Genesis chapter 35, verse 7. So here's what you should ask yourself. Would the Israelites really have believed that the spirit of Samuel was on the same ontological level as Yahweh? Of course not. Not all Elohim are equal. Not all Elohim are equal. So Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. There are other ways of parsing this. Like I said, there's only one Elohim who is a maximally great being. There's only one God with a capital G. There are many gods with lowercase g's. There are many spirits, but there's only one omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent spirit who created everything. So in conclusion then, in Deuteronomy 32:8, Job 1:6, Job 2:1, Job 38:7, and Psalm 82, the phrase sons of God refers to divine beings. This makes the interpretation of Genesis chapter 6, verses 1-4, referring to divine beings, plausible. Piece of evidence number 2. Evidence 2. 2 Peter 2 and Jude interpret the sin in Genesis 6, the sin of Genesis 6, as being the sin of the watchers in the book of Enoch. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4-10 says, quote, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell," that should be Tartarus, "and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness, to be kept until the judgment. If he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly." If by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority, end quote. Jude 6-7 says, and angels who did not keep their own domain, but demanded their proper abode, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in gross immorality and pursued strange flesh, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire, end quote. So as you can see here, we have Peter and Jude talking about angels who sinned. Angels who sinned being cast into Tartarus, committed to chains of gloomy darkness. And you can see in the context, this is the antediluvian era, because he immediately after that, he mentions, but preserved Noah. You know, he committed the angels to chains of gloomy darkness, but he preserved Noah. So there's a contrast here between these two elements, between these two groups of people. And then it goes on to mention Sodom and Gomorrah. And Peter here is the context, he's talking about false prophets, and he's using examples of God's judgment in the past. And Jude says the same thing. He talks about angels who sinned and were put into chains, gloomy chains of darkness. Now, if you, and most Christians haven't, and I didn't for much of my Christian life, if you haven't read First Enoch, then you will likely not catch these connections, the connections of the angels who sinned to the Genesis 6 narrative quite as easily. I mean, I think you can get it if you look at these two passages and you really pay attention. You can say, okay, angels who sinned, but he preserved Noah, and then he brought a flood. Okay, there's something going on there. Well, what? I think you can, but it's much difficult if you don't have the Enochian. It's much more difficult if you don't have the Enochian backdrop. Second Peter and Jude, as many New Testament scholars realize, they are getting their information about these angels who sinned from the book of First Enoch. And I've got a chart here from Brian Godawa's book, When Giants Were Upon the Earth. And here you can see that there are many parallels between Jude and First Enoch, the way that they are worded. In Jude, you see in verses 1-2, to those who are called, beloved in God the Father, and kept for Jesus Christ, may mercy, peace, and love be multiplied to you. And in First Enoch, chapter 1, verse 8, and to all the righteous he will grant peace. He will preserve the elect, and kindness shall be upon them. They shall all belong to God, and they shall prosper and be blessed, and the light of God shall shine unto them. And then in Jude, verse 4, certain people who long ago were designated for this condemnation, Jude 4, for certain people designated for this condemnation, ungodly people. And then in Enoch, we read, things sealed in heaven, about to befall sinners, to destroy all the ungodly, the works of ungodliness which they have ungodly committed, and of all the hard things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. It's all very ungodly. And then in verse 4, we read of Jude, who pervert the grace of our God into sensuality and deny our only Master and Lord, Jesus Christ. In Enoch, they believe in the debauchery of their bodies and they deny the Spirit of the Lord. Jude talks about angels who did not keep their own domain but abandoned their own proper abode. And then in First Enoch, you have the Watchers who have abandoned the high heaven, the holy eternal place. Jude went after strange flesh. First Enoch, the Watchers defiled themselves with women. I'm going to turn my laser pointer off. There's just a lot of parallels between First Jude and Enoch. Why is this important? Well, First Enoch 7 says, quote, "It happened after the sons of men had multiplied in those days, that daughters were born to them, elegant and beautiful. And when the angels, the sons of heaven, beheld them, and they became enamored of them, saying to each other, Come, let us select for ourselves wives from the progeny of men, and let us beget children. Then their leader, Semiaza, said to them, I fear that you may perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise, and that I alone shall suffer for so grievous a crime. But they answered him and said, We all swear and bind ourselves by mutual execrations that we will not change our intention, but execute our projected undertaking. Then they swore all together, and all bound themselves by mutual execrations. Their whole number was 200, who descended upon Ardis, which is the top of Mount Hermon. That mountain, therefore, was called Hermon, because they had sworn upon it, and bound themselves by mutual execrations. These are the names of their chiefs: Semiaza, who was their leader, Urakabarmiril, Akibil, Tamiel, Ramuel, Danel, Askiel, Sarakinel, Azael, Amar, Batral, Anani, Zavebi, Savil, Etriel, Turiel, Yamyaliel, Araziel. These were the prefects of the 200 angels, and the remainder were all with them. Then they took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and dividing of roots and trees. And the women conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was each 300 cubits. These devoured all which labor of men produced, until it became impossible to feed them. When they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood, then the earth reproved the unrighteous. End quote. So that's the passage about the giants and the sin of the Watchers in 1 Enoch 7. Look at this parallel between Jude 14 to 15 and 1 Enoch 1:9. Jude 14 to 15 says, quote, "It was also about these that Enoch, in the 7th generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord came with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment on all, and to convict everyone of all the deeds of ungodliness they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Excuse me. 1 Enoch 1:9 says, quote, "Behold, he comes with 10,000 saints to execute judgment upon all, and he will destroy all the ungodly and convict all flesh of all the deeds of their ungodliness that they have ungodly committed in an ungodly way, and of all the arrogant and hard words which sinners have spoken against him." End quote. So as you can see, we have nearly identical wording here between Jude 14 and 15 and 1 Enoch 1:9. Jude is dependent on Enoch to a certain degree. Dr. Taylor Marshall says in his article, Angels Having Relations with Humans, within Jude and 2 Peter and 1 Enoch, that, quote, it's not only this direct quotation of Enoch by Jude, but Jude and 2 Peter allude to the fantastical events of 1st Enoch, namely the sexual encounters of fallen angels with human women, which gives birth to the Nephilim, or giants. The birth of the giants, according to 1st Enoch, is the reason for the Noah's flood, end quote. Marshall goes on to say that his belief is also found in the book of Wisdom, which says, quote, "And from the beginning also, when the proud giants perished, the hope of the world fleeing to a vessel, which was governed by thy hand, left to the world seed of generation," end quote. Wisdom 14:6. Now, you don't have to believe that 1st Enoch is inspired to affirm the Enochian interpretation of Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. You just have to believe 2 Peter and Jude were. Now, I am way more familiar with the canonization process of the New Testament than I am the Old Testament. I don't really know that much about the Old Testament canonization. I've read a little bit about it in Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict, but I don't remember much of what I read about the process. I'm way more familiar with the New Testament canonization process, and I believe that by providence, all of the Old Testament books that were supposed to be in the Old Testament got in there. So I'm not going to comment on why the Book of Enoch was rejected, but I'm sure that the Jewish people who were forming the canon had good reasons to leave it out. I mean, it's not just absent from the Protestant canon. It's even Protestant from the Deuterocanon, which is accepted by the Roman Catholics and the Anglicans. It's a pseudepigraphal work. It's not even in the apocryphal books or the Deuterocanon, the Deuterocanonical books, like Jubilees. So I'm sure it didn't make it in there for a reason, but books that did make it into the New Testament canon, 2 Peter and Jude, put their stamp of approval on the Enochian interpretation of the events of Genesis 6. And if you believe 2 Peter and Jude are inspired, then it doesn't matter if you don't believe 1st Enoch is inspired. That's irrelevant. Also, I want to bring your attention to these parallels, not only between the New Testament and the Watcher tradition, but also this Greek myth. I got this slide as a screenshot from Ben Stanhope's video on the Nephilim. 2 Peter 2:4, God did not spare angels, but cast them into Tartarus, that's highlighted in pink, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. And in Enoch, we read, the Lord said, bind, committed them to chains, bind Azazel, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, gloomy darkness, 2 Peter 2:4, and let him abide there forever. And in Jude, we have, and the angels he has kept in eternal chains. In 2 Peter, we have angels being kept into chains. In Enoch, we have the Lord commanding someone to bind Azazel. Chains, chains, chains. Cover him with darkness. Enoch, well, Jude 6 says that the angels are kept under gloomy darkness. These are the words highlighted in orange here, the gloomy darkness, those parallels. And let him abide there forever. Kept in, Jude 6, kept in eternal chains. That's the foreverness part. 2 Peter 2:4, until the judgment. And then we have this parallel with Enoch. On the day of the great judgment, he shall be cast into the fire. Go, bind Semijaza and his associates who have unified themselves with women. Bind them fast in the valleys of the earth till all their days, till the day of their judgment. Here, angels being judged, all of this blue highlighted text. And we have, once again, the binding, this in green text. Now, we've looked at 2 Peter 2 and Jude and the Watcher tradition in the pseudepigraphal work. Where did this word Tartarus come from? It's not used anywhere else in the New Testament. It's not used, not to my knowledge, anywhere in the Septuagint of the Old Testament. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Here's where it is used. In Theogony 713 to 735. Quote, 300 rocks, one upon another, they launched them from their strong hands and overshadowed the Titans with their missiles, and bound them in bitter chains when they had conquered them, as far beneath the earth as heaven is above earth, for so far it is from earth to Tartarus, where by the counsel of Zeus, the Titan gods are hidden under misty gloom in a dank place, and they may not go out, end quote. So in Enoch, we have the jagged rocks. The Lord said, bind Azazel, and place him upon rough and jagged rocks. And we have jagged rocks being put over the Titans. Bound in bitter chains. Tartarus. 2 Peter 2:4 says that the angels were cast into Tartarus. And what's being talked about in this Greek myth? Gods versus giants. This is what some scholars call the Titanomachy. The Nephilim were giants. They were the spawn of divine beings and humans. That leads to my next piece of evidence. Evidence 3, the Nephilim were not physiologically normal. In Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, this is when Moses and the Israelites arrive at the Promised Land, and they sent Moses and Israel sent spies into the land to do some spying, and when they came back, they gave a report. Numbers chapter 13, verse 33 says, quote, and there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them, end quote. So obviously, the Nephilim were big. They were like, the Israelite spies seemed like grasshoppers when they compared themselves with the height of the Nephilim there. They were really big. And the Nephilim likewise saw the Israelites as grasshoppers. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 4 to 7 tells us that Goliath was a whopping 9 feet 9 inches tall, or 6 cubits and a span. His coat of mail alone weighed about 125 pounds. The weight of his spearhead was 15 pounds. Joshua chapter 11, verses 21 to 22 says, quote, then Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. There were no Anakim left in the land of the sons of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod some remained, end quote. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 10 to 11 and verses 20 to 23, quote, the Emim formerly lived there, a people great and many, and tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they are also counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them Emim. It is also counted as a land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites called them Zamzumim. a people great and many, and tall as the Anakim. But the Lord destroyed them before the Ammonites, and they dispossessed them and settled in their place, as he did for the people of Esau who live in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites before them, and they dispossessed them and settled in their place, even to this day. As for the Avim, who lived in villages as far as Gaza, the Captorim, who came from Captor, destroyed them and settled in their place, end quote. In the Logos.com blog post, Goliath isn't the only giant in the Bible, here's where they came from, Dr. Michael Heiser gives a short list of all the giant clans. Dr. Michael Heiser writes, quote, there are several people groups described as giants or among whom giants lived in the Old Testament. 1, there are the Anakim, who are descendants from the Nephilim, mentioned in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. Compare Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, and whom the people of Israel encountered under Moses and later under Joshua. Numbers chapter 13, verses 22 to 33. Joshua chapter 15, verses 13 to 14. 2, at one time, before the children of Israel traveled through the Transjordan, the land to the east of the Jordan River was heavily populated with tall people known as Emim, Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 10 to 11, and the Zamzumim, also called the Zuzim, Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 20. 3, the Amorites, another group that stood in the way of Israel claiming the promised land, are described as being exceptionally tall, Amos chapter 2, verses 9 to 10. 4, lastly, there were the Rephaim, which are mentioned nearly 20 times, most often in association with the conquest of the promised land, when Moses encountered King Og of Bashan, whose bed measured to 13 feet in length. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 11, verses 20 to 23, chapter 3, verses 11 to 13, Joshua chapter 12, verse 4, and chapter 13, verse 13, end quote. To quote, this is a quote and a graphic from Ben Stanhope's video on the Nephilim. If the clear-cut biblical passages just cited about the Nephilim being giants aren't enough, Ben Stanhope also argues that the very etymology of the term Nephilim supports gigantism. He says, quote, the vast majority of academic dictionaries routinely explain this word as the masculine plural form of the Hebrew Nephal, in other words, the fallen ones. But the linguist Michael Heiser has pointed out a problem for this view. The word Nephilim occurs 3 times in the Bible. In 2 of these cases, a stem of Nephalim, for to fall, makes intuitive sense. But in Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, there's a complication with this etymology. There, the word is spelled with an extra yod in its center. Biblical Hebrew had no symbol for vowels, so sometimes consonants that double as vowels, like the letter Y, could be used to clarify the presence of a vowel pronunciation in a spelling. In this variant spelling in Numbers 13, we see a scribal gloss indicating the base word of Nephilim was originally pronounced with a long E. This means that the word Nephilim cannot be derived from the verb like to fall, because verbal forms in Hebrew are never spelled this way. The masculine plural participle of Nephal is patterned with a long O instead of an E. There is, however, an alternative route that does conform with the variant spelling, the Aramaic noun Naphil. The Aramaic word Naphil means giant, end quote. Now, before we look at the alternatives and what the pros and the cons with those, let's look at a couple of objections to this view that I have put forth. Objection 1, angels are immaterial spirits. How can a spirit have sex with a biological creature? This was an objection that I have had to this view for the longest time, and it was one of the only 2 reasons that kept me from embracing it. I don't think it's a good objection. In his book, Reversing Herman, Enoch, the Watchers, and the Forgotten Mission of Jesus Christ, Dr. Michael S. Heiser says, quote, he says that the angels have the ability to take on physicality. He says, quote, for example, Genesis 18-19 is quite clear that Yahweh himself and two other divine beings met with Abraham in physical flesh. They ate a meal together. Genesis chapter 18, verses 1-8. Genesis chapter 19, verse 10 informs us that the two angels had to physically grab Lot and pull him back into his house to avoid harm in Sodom, something that would be hard to do if the two beings were not truly physical. Another example is Genesis chapter 32, verses 22-31, where we read that Jacob wrestled with a man, 32:24, whom the text also describes as Elohim twice, chapter 32, verses 30-31. Hosea chapter 12, verses 3-4 refers to this incident and describes the being who wrestled with Jacob as Elohim and Malach, angel. This was a physical struggle, and one that left Jacob injured. Chapter 32, verse 31-32, end quote. Given these biblical examples of angels taking on physical form, we must conclude that it is possible that they could take on a physical form for the purpose of reproduction. Objection 2. Matthew 22 implies that angels cannot have sex. This was the other objection that kept me from embracing the angel-human hybrid view for a long time. Matthew chapter 22, verses 23-33 says, quote, the same day Sadducees came to him, who say that there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses says, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So too the second and the third, down to the 7th. After them all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. But Jesus answered them, you are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. End quote. So this passage is used to argue, oh, well, there's no marriage in among the angels in heaven. And when we're raised from the dead, we're not going to marry or be given into marriage either. And so that means that there must not be any sex in heaven. And because there's no sex in heaven, angels can't have sex. They can't have sex because they're not married. And the angels in heaven, well, I mean, if they had sex outside of marriage, that would be a sin, because it's a sin to have sex outside of marriage. But they don't marry. So angels can't have sex, and so that just totally defeats this view. Except this passage isn't talking about what angels can or cannot do, but what they do or do not do. It doesn't say they can't marry or given into marriage. It doesn't say they can't have sexual relations. It just says they don't marry and they don't do the naughties. Angels, and the reason's pretty obvious for why the angels don't do it and why the resurrected redeemed won't do it. Angels have no need for procreation, and neither will resurrected humans. What's the purpose? What's the purpose of procreation? What's the purpose of sex? It's to make more babies. Well, why do we need more babies? Well, before the fall, before sin came to human beings, it was just simply to fill the earth and to multiply and fill the earth so that we'd have people all over the planet. But after the fall, it has an additional reason. We die. If nobody did it for 40, 50 years, the human race would go extinct. We need to keep making babies so that there's always people on the planet, people to replace us when we're gone. But at the resurrection, we're going to have immortal, imperishable bodies, as 1 Corinthians 15 says. So we won't need to make more people to replace us. We won't go extinct. We won't die. Angels don't either. So, yeah. Also notice the setting. It's talking about angels in heaven. It's not making a comment on what angels can or cannot do or do not do when they come to earth. So Matthew chapter 22 verses 23 to 33 is a useless commentary in this context. Now, let's look at the other options for identifying the biblical Nephilim. The other options are what's called the Sethite view, Neanderthals, and the warrior offspring of ancient divinized kings. I'm going to address these in order. The Sethite interpretation teaches that the sons of God in Genesis 6 are descendants from the godly line of Seth's lineage. The daughters of men are evil descendants from the ungodly line of Cain. God wanted to keep the pure line separate from the impure line. So when the sons of God went into the daughters of men and bore children to them, the bloodlines were mixed. Now, here are the problems with this view. The idea that only people of Seth lineage called upon the name of the Lord must be read into Genesis 4:26. Also, in Genesis 6, Seth and Cain aren't mentioned by name at all. Moreover, Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4 makes it clear that the interbreeding is between offspring of one type of entity, God, and offspring of another type, man. As Michael Heiser said in his book Reversing Herman, quote, a close reading of Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4 makes it clear that a contrast is being created between two classes of individuals, one human and the other divine. When speaking of how humanity was multiplying on earth, verse 1, the text mentions only daughters. Daughters were born to them. The point is not literally that every birth in the history of the earth after Cain and Abel resulted in a girl. Rather, the writer is setting up a contrast of two groups. The first group is human and female, the daughters of humankind. Verse 2 introduces the other group for the contrast, the sons of God. That group is not human, but divine. End quote. Other problems, one more problem with this view is that it completely ignores 2 Peter 2 and Jude 7, which adopt 1 Enoch's interpretation of the Genesis 6 event. What about the Neanderthal interpretation? Could the Nephilim be the offspring of humans and Neanderthals? Greg Davidson, in his book Friend of Science, Friend of Faith, says, quote, one might speculate further, given the genetic evidence we have today, if the Genesis story dates back to a period of overlap between humans and Neanderthals. This could have occurred if the date was several tens of thousands of years ago, or if a population of Neanderthals persisted beyond what we find. For even if a highly hybridized subpopulation existed at the same time as the first true humans, Neanderthals were not the brutish ape men depicted in cartoons. Though of diminished cognitive potential relative to humans, Neanderthals were nonetheless similar to humans in appearance and many behaviors. They lived in groups, fabricated tools, placed items related to daily life in the graves of their dead, and may have engaged in rudimentary art. Neanderthals were not taller than humans, but their bone structure was designed for greater musculature and greater strength. Reproduction between humans and Neanderthals, now documented within the human genome, could have possibly produced individuals of admirable strength and prowess in hunting or in battle. It is also possible for hybrids to combine genes in a way that produces traits not found in either parent, a phenomenon known as heterosis. it is possible that some of these offspring could have had an unusual stature as well as strength, giving people another reason to identify them by a special name. End quote. Now, the advantages of this view is it explains why the offspring were so unusual. It recognizes that there's two groups, descendants of human beings and descendants of non-humans. But the problems with this view are, again, it ignores what 2 Peter and Jude say. And the Bible calls divine beings sons of God several times in the Old Testament. Job 1:6, Job 2:1, Job chapter 38, verses 4-7, Psalm 82, making divine beings a more likely candidate. And also, I think that this is based on an outdated view of the Neanderthals. Neanderthals were not these sort of brutish animal. People who make this interpretation basically dehumanize Neanderthals. Like they're not humans. They're sort of like humans, but not quite. They're really more like animals. And so, in relations between humans and between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, that would be tantamount to bestiality. But there's recent evidence has come to light that, and I'm not going to get into all of this, but recent evidence has come to light that Neanderthals had roughly the same cognitive capacity as Homo sapiens, rationality. They built tools, they had like cave religious art, they buried their dead, and Homo heidelbergensis, which predates Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, also had these cognitive faculties and made, they made like spears that when scientists compared them with Olympic javelins, like it was just as good as an Olympic javelin. I mean, so like, as William Lane Craig said, I'm not willing to, quote unquote, write them out of the human race. I really don't see why God would have a problem with Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbreeding any more than he would, say, a Dalmatian and a golden retriever. They're just two different kinds of dogs. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens are just two different kinds of human. Now, here's the non-supernatural interpretation that I find the most plausible. I find it to be the best rival to the angel human hybrid view, and that is that the Nephilim are offspring of ancient divinized kings and just regular women. I'm going to interact exclusively with Michael Jones's video on this, since I think he gives the strongest defense of this view. And we're going to be looking at some clips from Genesis 6, from Inspiring Philosophy, from his video Genesis 6 and the Nephilim. And I know we're going to go a little over time, but I'm still going to stick around for some Q&A, provided that you have questions. And I hope you do. I haven't looked at the chat, but I'm guessing, well, I see one comment. I'll address that later. Anyway, Michael Jones starts off his video by saying, quote, "The sons of God refer to earthly kings or tribal leaders who used their power and authority to begin practicing polygamy or the right of first night by taking as many as they chose," end quote.
For the arguments for this view, and then address the main arguments for the angelic interpretation. My argument will be based on 4 points: immediate context, surrounding context, the larger context of the entirety of Genesis, and cultural parallels. First, if nothing from the Hebrew Bible survived to the present, except these 4 verses, it could hardly be argued this passage refers to any sort of union between women and divine beings. Go with me for a minute and just look at what the text says by itself, without thinking of what later authors might indicate. The text begins by telling us mankind began to multiply throughout the land. Then it introduces another group, called sons of God, who wed daughters of men. Then in verse 3, God says, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh." Oddly enough, God's own statement tells us who has caused his anger. It was men, not men and divine beings. Verse 3 indicates the 2 groups of verse 2 were 2 classes of humans. Verse 1 sets the context. It is about humankind producing offspring. And verse 3 indicates the problem arises from 2 classes of humans.
So that's
So we'll offer the arguments for this view, and then address the main arguments for the
So here is how I responded to that argument in my paper, Genesis 6, the Nephilim, descendants of Cain, Neanderthals, ancient kings, or angel-human hybrids. I said, quote, "The problem with this argument is that it clearly is an argument from silence, and it does not take into account the rest of the evidence. Obviously, if human beings were willingly having sex with divine beings, they would be guilty of the sin of abandoning the natural created order and, as Jude says, engaging in sexual immorality and seeking after strange flesh. In this case, the human women would be seeking the strange flesh of the angel. Moreover, it is clear that while the Nephilim incident was one reason that God sent the flood, it was not the only reason. General human depravity was also a motivating factor, as Christians have traditionally believed. This is evident from verses 5 and 6, which say, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I created, from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them." ESV. So of course God would say that his spirit would not strive with man forever. Human beings were just as guilty as the divine beings who left their proper abode, as Jude 6-7 says. That God does not mention divine beings in his statement of who he will not strive with forever is no indication that there is no one else that he is striving with, end quote. Then I go on to say, quote, "This is the same illogic that young earth creationists employ in trying to argue that no one ever ate meat prior to the flood, based on Genesis 1:29, which says, 'And God said to them, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed and its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food.' And it was so." ESV. Young earth creationists argue from this passage that God does not mention to the humans and the animals that he has given them any sort of animals for food. He only mentions plant yielding seed and every tree with seed in its fruit. Young earth creationists argue that, therefore, everyone, human and animal alike, had a vegetarian diet. But just like Jones' argument from Genesis 6:3, the fact that God does not mention that he gave other animals to eat in Genesis 1 does not mean at all that he did not give other animals for food. You cannot make an argument on the basis of what you do not find in the text. To do so commits the logical fallacy known as the argument from silence. Whether or not there was carnivorous activity before the fall, one would have to look at other evidence, whether that be evidence in the Bible or scientific evidence. Likewise, whether or not those coming under God's judgment, the Great Deluge, consist of more than human beings, one would have to look at more than just this passage, end quote. Then I say, moreover, the term sons of God, B'nai Ha-Elohim, in Hebrew almost always refers to divine beings in the Old Testament. The usages of B'nai Ha-Elohim, which refer to divine beings, are to be found in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 to 9, Job chapter 1, verse 6, Job chapter 38, verse 7, and Psalm chapter 82, verse 6. This makes the likelihood that it also refers to divine beings in Genesis 6 very likely. The only times in the Old Testament in which the term does not refer to a divine being is when it is referring to corporate Israel, as in Exodus 4:22. In the New Testament, in the New Covenant, the phrase carries over to refer to human Christian men who become sons of God through adoption by the Holy Spirit, as we see in John chapter 1, verse 12. However, in the Old Testament, 7 out of 10 times it refers to divine or angelic beings. Michael Jones acknowledges this fact in his video, but basically says, I'm sorry, my nose is just itching. But basically says, so what? It's used to refer to human beings at times as well. And he cites 2 Samuel 7:14, Exodus 4:22, Deuteronomy 14:1, and Psalm chapter 80, verse 15. True enough, but I'm not going to hang the quasi-divine or angelic hybrid interpretation on a single title. I do use it as evidence, but only as one piece of evidence in a cumulative case.
Outside of the Hebrew scriptures, it was common to refer to the king as a son of God. In the Ugaritic myth, King Keret is identified as son of El. In the ancient Gudea cylinder, the ruler of Gudea is also referred to as a son of a god. So is possibly another Sumerian ruler. So calling ancient kings sons of God was an ancient cultural norm. And given the immediate context of the passage, there is nothing incoherent about the sons of God being ancient rulers who became corrupt by becoming polygamous, which the line, they took as their wives any they chose, would indicate.
Oh, come on now. And to this point that I just played, I respond by saying, quote, but again, the case for the angelic hybrid interpretation does not rest solely on the phrase sons of God. But moreover, it is indeed the case that pagan ancient kings considered themselves to be offspring of deity. But nowhere else in the Bible is the term sons of God used in reference to such rulers, unless you presuppose that Genesis 6 is an instance of that. I think it would be quite odd that Moses, or whoever wrote Genesis, would sort of legitimize their divinized kingship by calling them sons of God. You would think that Moses would want to delegitimize their divine authority, especially considering that Moses just got done battling with a king, Pharaoh, who considered himself to be a god, and a god who could go toe-to-toe with Yahweh, no less. This would be quite unusual, given that in Genesis 1, many scholars find anti-pagan god polemics. For example, instead of calling the sun and moon by their Hebrew names, which were also the names of deities who were worshipped by those names, he simply calls them the greater light and the lesser light. And he doesn't even bother to mention them until day 4 of the Genesis creation narrative. Why would Moses not also use non-divine terms to delegitimize the divine nature of these ancient pagan kings? Perhaps Jones could argue that he used the phrase to alert his readers that kings who believed themselves to be divine were the identity of who he was talking about. However, Moses could have identified them without directly calling them sons of God. He could have said, kings who believed themselves to be sons of God, or rulers who thought themselves to be gods, or something like that. I realize that Hebrew is a small language, but it wasn't so small that Moses couldn't have used a different vocabulary.
chose would indicate. As John Walton says, in this interpretation, the sons of God are the heroic tyrant kings of old. The daughters of men refer to any female in the kingdom. Next, what about the Nephilim? Well, the internal context also doesn't suggest we are talking about quasi-divine beings. First, John Walton and Kenneth Matthews note the phrase, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, could refer to the very next line of the sons of God mating with the daughters of men. Thus, the passage could mean the Nephilim were not the direct descendants of the sons of God, but simply a group that existed before the transgression of the sons of God. Therefore, the reference to Nephilim would just denote this was a heroic age. Now, chose would indicate.
To this point in my paper, I respond, while I have nothing but the utmost respect for Professor John Walton, I think that he is utterly wrong here, as is Michael Jones. This interpretation of the Nephilim makes the Nephilim utterly unconnected to the flood narrative in any way. Basically, it amounts to Moses saying, the sons of God went into the daughters of men. By the way, there were these mighty warriors around. Now, because of the sin of the sons of God and the daughters of men, God is going to destroy the world. Clearly, the presence of the Nephilim is not a random historical fact that Moses decided to throw in there because he found it to be an interesting factoid. There's clearly a connection between the sin of the sons of God and daughters of men and the presence of the Nephilim. These two are connected, as the vast majority of Old Testament and ancient Near Eastern scholars agree. Jones then goes on to say that even if angelic hybrid proponents are correct in saying that the Nephilim are the direct offspring of the sons of God and daughters of men, the problem is that the immediate context of the text defines what the Nephilim are for us. Jones underlines this part of the passage in his YouTube video that says, these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of the name. The Hebrew word here is gibborim. So Jones is basically like, look, it says these are just men, mighty men, men of the name. They're men, not half God, half human creatures. This is a very poor argument. Obviously, if the quasi-angel was an adult male of great strength and stature, we would expect them to be called mighty men. What other term would the author use to describe them? After all, on my view, they would be at least half human, so calling them men with any kind of prefix or suffix seems appropriate in my opinion. Moreover, by this reasoning, the reasoning that because the term mighty men is used, that therefore these are just regular human beings, Michael Jones would be forced to say that the men who appeared to Abraham in Genesis 18 were also just ordinary men, pure humans. This is because Genesis 18:2 says, quote, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and cast himself toward the ground, end quote. King James Version. The Hebrew word here, translated as men, is anasim. Although it is not the same Hebrew word used in Genesis 6, gibborim, nevertheless, I think that a similar argument could be employed. Anasim is also is most often used of ordinary men, like we read in Genesis 12:10 and Genesis 13:8. So if Jones is going to argue that gibborim, mighty men, means that the Nephilim were just regular human beings, then he would also have to say that the men who went to visit Lot and saw them were not really angels, and that is obviously not a valid interpretation. By the way, it just occurred to me, there is a place in the Old Testament where Yahweh is called a gibborim. I think it's the song of, it's either the song of Deborah or the song of Miriam. I can't remember which. I'm just going based off of memory here, and I don't have it in this slide. But Yahweh, I mean, he's clearly a divine being. He's the divine being. You can do some your own research. Google that, but that just came to me. It's in one of the, I think it's the Song of Miriam. like right after the Exodus, but I'm not sure.
Genesis 4, Cain's focus is on himself, not his family. It is all about his name and his own reputation. He builds a settlement which is about honoring the name of his son. His descendant Lamech is boastful and gloats his own accomplishments to bolster his own reputation. Then, of course, we hear about his polygamous actions as well. After the break in the story to present the genealogy from Adam to Noah, it would make sense for the story to pick up where it left off with the sins of humanity reaching a peaking point in pride, violence, and polygamy. This is probably why Genesis 6 refers to the sons of God taking wives, plural, as they chose. My argument is it picks up where we left off with Lamech taking multiple wives. Now, not only have the descendants of Cain fallen into polygamy, the rulers of humanity, the ones meant to mediate between God and the rest of mankind, have fallen into this sin that God detests. They have become greedy and lustful, and their descendants are also focusing on making a name for themselves, not on honoring the name of God. Genesis 3 is about the fall of the first priests, Genesis 4 is about the fall of the family, and Genesis 6 is about the fall of civilization. The sequence just simply flows. As Meredith Klein says, in Cain's dedication of his city to the name of his heir, there was foreshadowed the lust for a name that was increasingly to mark these city rulers, until when the city-states began to be theocratically conceived, they esteemed themselves veritable sons of the gods, and so men of name. Structurally, the accounts of Lamech and the sons of God are much alike. In each case, there are the taking of wives, the bearing of children, and the dynastic exploits. Genesis 6:1 and following simply summarizes and concludes the course of dynastic development, which had already been presented in the individual histories of the several rulers, indicating how the evil potential of Canaanite kingship, betrayed even in its earliest beginnings, was given such full vent in its final stages, as to produce a state of tyranny and corruption intolerable to the God of heaven. Next, the surrounding context after Genesis 6 also indicates we are talking about polygamous kings. Right after this section, the author says all flesh had become corrupt, and God once again pronounces his judgment will fall on mankind, not humans and divine beings like in Genesis 3. But also notice how Noah is described. Noah is contrasted with the unrighteous humans of his day as being a righteous man, and we are reminded constantly of one of the features of Noah, that he had one wife, and his sons each only had one wife. In fact, between Genesis 6 and 8, we are told 5 times Noah only had one wife. This seems like overkill for a high-context society. The author seems to want to remind us a distinguishing feature of Noah is that he was
Monogamous. By the way, if you have questions, leave them in the live chat. I promise we are close. We are close to being done, and I will answer them after we get done. Well, in response to this portion of Michael Jones's video, I say in my paper on Genesis 6, I'll be honest, I don't know what to make of the repeated statement that Noah has only one wife. However, I'll explain near the end of this subsection why this inability to explain this feature doesn't make me doubt the angelic hybrid interpretation. However, while polygamy is a sin in the Bible, there are various instances of it, even regarding biblical heroes, as Jones himself points out. Yet God did not seem to consider it so awful a sin that death was the punishment, especially death of all humankind. In fact, almost everyone agrees that polygamy was the norm in the ancient Near East, well after the time of the flood. And yet God lets these marriages go on. It doesn't seem plausible to think that the reason God sent the flood upon the ancient world was that people were polygamous. Something far more serious was going on.
Genesis is the author's hatred of polygamy for the disastrous consequences it causes, it would fit that the authors would indicate this is one of the sins which brought about the punishment of the flood. It simply aligns with a reoccurring issue they bring up. Second, Meredith Klein notes Nimrod also falls into the same category as the Nephilim, as a mighty man. The same word used to describe Nimrod is also used to describe the Nephilim. Yet it is clear Nimrod was not semi-divine, but a descendant of Cush.
Well, again, there's that place in the Old Testament where God is called a Gibberim, a man of war. I think the English translations say man of war. Oh, I hate how Google Slides does the videos. Anyway, I respond to this in my paper. Jones is presupposing that Nimrod is not a semi-divine person. In Brian Godawa's novel, Gilgamesh Immortal, he speculates that the Gilgamesh from the Epic of Gilgamesh was actually the biblical Nimrod, and that the biblical authors called Gilgamesh by the name of Nimrod because it was a jab against him. This is not at all an implausible hypothesis because, as Godawa points out in his appendix to Gilgamesh Immortal, the Hebrew writers of the Bible frequently engaged in the renaming of enemies for political purposes. Beelzebul, the god of Ekron, is renamed Beelzebub by the author of 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 2 to 6, which means the derogatory Lord of the Flies. The wicked queen of Tyre, whose name Isabel meant "Where is the Prince of Baal?" was renamed by the Jews as Jezebel, which is a slurring wordplay on dung. 2 Kings 9:37. In fact, Genesis 11:9 even explains its polemical renaming of the city of Babylon, gateway of the gods, to Babel, confusing of tongues. In Noah Primeval, Godawa tells the story that the Watchers implanted in Cush's mother genetic codes that would unfold in giants as the generations went on. But regardless of whether Godawa's speculation on Gilgamesh and Nimrod have any basis in actual history, the Bible is clear that giants appeared after the flood. In fact, the land of Canaan was crawling with them. The Watchers may have gone into the human women after the flood, just like they did before the flood. Regardless of how it happened, I am inclined to believe Nimrod was a god-human hybrid precisely because the Gibberim label is applied to him. Now, I actually am not quite as firm on this part of my paper as I was when I first wrote it. One is that you don't have to be an angel-human hybrid in order to be called a Gibberim, a mighty man. Just as all spiritual beings are Elohim, but not all spiritual beings are like Yahweh. There's only one of those. So in the same way, all Nephilim are mighty men, but not all mighty men are Nephilim. So, Godawa, Nimrod could have just been a great warrior. But he also could have been a Nephilim. So anyway, I write, overall, Michael Jones's interpretation of the Nephilim is implausible. Oh, and also, again, Yahweh is called a Gibberim, and he's not quasi-divine. He's fully divine. He's the original Elohim. So I say, overall, Michael Jones's interpretation of the Nephilim is implausible, and the arguments that he uses to support it in his YouTube video are unpersuasive. It ultimately fails to account for all the evidence. Now, with that said, again, I think that this interpretation is the best rival to the angel hybrid view, and I've got to commend Michael Jones for giving such a strong case for it. I chose to interact specifically with Jones because I thought he gave the best arguments, and I wanted to interact with the best arguments. That's what you do. You want to interact with the best arguments for positions you disagree with. You don't want to interact with the weakest ones. You want to, you want to steel man your opponent. You want to attack their you want their best. But ultimately, I think I think it's the best, to put it this way, I think it's the best of the failures. So the evidence that needs to be explained is, one, this term sons of God almost always refers to divine beings in the Old Testament. 2 Peter and Jude take the divine interpretation of Genesis 6, quoting and drawing from 1st Enoch, and the offspring of the sons of God were giants. If these were just intermingling between two groups of Homo sapiens, two groups of human beings, why are the offspring giants? Why are they freaks of nature? Shouldn't they just be regular humans? And the sin being polygamous, well, God didn't seem so upset about polygamy after the flood that he would, destroy everything. I mean, I know he promised not to destroy everything with a flood, but hey, he could use fire, he could use plague. He's got a lot of resources available to him. He destroyed the entire city of Sodom with fire from heaven. He doesn't seem to think polygamy is a sin so grievous that mass destruction is required elsewhere in the Bible and where polygamy occurs. So if you want to go deeper, these are the 3 books I highly recommend: Reversing Herman, Enoch, the Watchers, and the Forgotten Mission of Jesus Christ by Dr. Michael S. Heiser. You could also check out When Giants Were Upon the Earth, The Watchers, the Nephilim, and the Biblical Cosmic War of the Sea by Brian Godawa. This book is a compilation of the appendices of his novel series, The Chronicles of the Nephilim. And it shows all of the biblical research and scholarly resources that he used to craft his novel series, which details the Biblical Cosmic War of the Seed, the Angels and Nephilim, Chronicles of the Nephilim. It's a very good book. It actually goes into more than just the Nephilim issue. It talks about ancient Near Eastern cosmology, the dome and the flat earth and the pillars and lots of cool stuff. If you're into ancient Near Eastern Old Testament studies, that's a really good book to read. I also recommend T.J. Stedman's Answers to Giant Questions: How Understanding the Biblical Nephilim Will Enlarge Your Faith. All 3 of these are really good. So that presentation was about as long. Actually, it was just as long as the Genesis 1 presentation. Now it is Q&A time. Andrew Risk says, is that a fair comparison? The Greek myth is about how the 100-hand ones, Cyclops and Olympians, fight against the Titans. Well, yeah, I think that is a fair comparison. I mean, we have these giants being imprisoned in Tartarus in gloomy chains, and it's because they were rebelling against the gods, and ultimately the greatest god, Zeus. I mean, there's a lot of dissimilarities, but I think the Greek myth has, like as we'll see in next week's presentation on the flood, I think the Greek myth, Enoch, they have a grounding in history and in actual historical events. There are actually a lot of myths that involve giants and divine beings and humans mating. And
I'm reminding you, take clonazepam.
Alexa, stop.
Clonazepam. Take clonazepam.
Angels and humans getting together and producing divine freaks of nature. And I think that these, like all of the ancient Near Eastern flood myths that I'm going to be analyzing next week, I think they all have a founding in history. They're not all right in every detail, but they're not just making it up out of thin air. I think based on my belief that the Bible is inspired, and I have good non-circular arguments for believing the Bible is inspired. I believe the Bible did get it right in all of the details. But Peter is obviously, I think he is, and the Enochian material too. I think they are not dependent, but they are like in the same train of thought as the Greek Titanomachy. Andrew Risk also asks, are these sons of God demons? Well, that depends on what you mean by demons. First Enoch actually tells us where demons come from. It says that they are the spirits, the disembodied souls of dead Nephilim. The flood came, all of the Nephilim drowned, and their spirit, it says their spirits came out of the earth and they go and they torment humankind. Just like what we see in the New Testament, like they afflict people. And now the Bible nowhere says that that's where demons come from. The Bible actually doesn't tell us where demons come from. We kind of assume that they're fallen angels, that fallen angels and demons are synonymous terms. Second Temple Jews would not have made that assumption, especially if they were like Peter and Jude, associated with the Enochian material. They would have thought, you just read the New Testament and just demons are all of a sudden everywhere, causing all sorts of trouble. Michael Heiser actually talks about this in his book called Demons, and he talks about it in the Unseen Realm. But should we believe the Enochian explanation for demons, that they are not, that they are the dead souls of these human angel hybrid people? Well, I don't know. Because we see Peter and Jude are very, very heavily reliant on Enoch. We saw that. And if you were to get in a time machine, or if you were to go to heaven and ask them, you don't even have to invoke time travel. If you were to ask them, hey, where do you think demons come from? They would have said, would they have said, oh, they're the spirits of the Nephilim, that the sons of God and the daughters of men created back in Noah's day? Would that have been their answer? Well, I think there's a high probability that might have been the way that they answered, because they seem to agree with Enoch on a lot of things. They seem to be very well acquainted, Peter and Jude, with Enoch. So would they have believed that demons, and if let's say that they don't talk about that in their letter, obviously, but let's say somebody who they were writing to was wondering about that, would that have been their answer? Possibly, maybe even probably. So I'm kind of inclined to say, yeah, I think the demons probably are dead Nephilim, not fallen angels. And in that case, the sons of God who went in the daughters of men, and also the sons of God who are allotted to the nations in Deuteronomy 32, they would not be demons. They would not be half human, they would not be the souls of half human, half angels. They would not be the disembodied souls of Nephilim. They would be just regular divine beings who were members of God's heavenly host, but then they rebelled. Andrew Risk, question number 2, do they, I guess that means the sons of God, do they form some sort of anti-Yahweh council? Well, that's really up for speculation. In the Chronicles of the Nephilim series by Brian Godawa, the gods they are sort of working together. They rule like different nations, and I guess you could call that an anti-divine council. But as far as other than artistic license from biblically based novels, I don't think there's anything we can say that they form For all we know, they could have just been doing their own thing. Some Second Temple Jews thought that they were working together, and I think that's plausible. There's nothing against that. Third question by Andrew Risk is, are these a potential reason for the flood and Canaanite conquest, a fumigation of the infestation of divine/human abominations? Yeah, exactly. That you hit the nail on the head. And in Answers to Giant Questions, T.J. Stedman talks about this. There obviously, one reason was that the Canaanites were very depraved. They were sacrificing their children to Molech. They were very bad people. But also, they had a Nephilim infestation, as you put it, and that is one reason. That is one reason why they were supposed to be killed. And Stedman actually makes a good argument that not many, other than the Nephilim warriors, would have been in the land. He makes an argument that because the land was humid, it was very fickle, that the people of Canaan were just ready to get up and go whenever drought struck, whenever they needed to go somewhere for food or water. Like we see this in Genesis with Jacob and his family when they go into Egypt because famine comes. So it's possible that I'll leave you to read that book to get his answer. But yeah, I mean, the conquest, getting rid of the Nephilim was definitely on God's agenda. Question number 4, regarding Beelzebub/Beelzebul, is that an actual demon's name, just a derogatory name for other gods, or a name of Satan? Well, let's see. Beelzebul is the original name. It was the name of the god of Ekron. And in the New Testament, that got attached to Satan. And given the Deuteronomy 32, that's worldview, that's very likely. But Beelzebub and Beelzebub, those are derogatory names. Those are Beelzebub means Lord of the Flies, whereas Beelzebul means I'm drawing a blank. Sorry, but it means Beelzebul with the L at the end. It means, I can't remember what it means, but it means something a lot more honorific than Lord of the Flies. By demons, I refer to spiritual entities that work against God. Oh, well, yeah. Well, by that definition, all the sons of God in Genesis 6 would be demons. By that definition, because they're transgressing. They're doing what they're not supposed to do. They're engaging in hanky-panky with human women and creating freaks of nature. Now, why are they doing this? Well, John Pitterson, in his book, Judgment of the Nephilim, and also Brian Godawa, talk about what is called the cosmic war of the seed. Basically, it points back to Genesis 3:15, where God says to Eve, talking about the offspring of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and how the offspring of the woman will crush the serpent's head. And they're trying to pollute the messianic bloodline. They're trying to stop the Messiah from coming into the world, because the Messiah is ultimately going to defeat them. And so, being human is a big major part of that. T.J. Stedman also talks about that in his book, Answers to Giant Questions. So that may be one reason, but it may also be that they were just overtaken by their passions. Yeah, on this cosmic war of the seed thing, they were trying to help him out. I think it's plausible that they were just overcome by their passions. I think they may. I mean, people can have more than one reason for doing something, right? So, tarnishing the messianic bloodline could have been one reason, but maybe they were just really really turned on and just really really wanted to get it on. that was another reason. So yeah, but that's an extension of the angel human hybrid view. If you don't find it tenable, you're not necessarily obligated to hold it. We got some pretty good questions here tonight. Only by one person, but we got several questions. If you have any more, leave them in the chat. I'll answer them. If not, then I'll just turn it off. Stop the stream. By the way, if you meet a girl and you want a good pickup line, here's one. Hey girl, are you an angel? I hope not, because our children would be quasi-divine human hybrid mutants. Hashtag Christian pickup lines. Zach Miller asks, are we going to become sons of God? Yeah, we are. This is part of what I would call the divine family motif. Michael Heiser details it in depth in his book, The Unseen Realm. We're not going to be like the same nature as angels exactly. We're going to be like the angels. Jesus said that in Matthew 22. They will neither marry nor be given into marriage, but will be like the angels in heaven. And John 1:12 says, to all who received him, Jesus, to all who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God or sons of God. Children not born according to the flesh or the will of man, but of the will of God. And Galatians also talks about how we are born. We are born as we are adopted into sonship. The Spirit of God, the Spirit of God's Son comes into our hearts crying, Abba, Father. So yeah, we're going to be sons of God. Andrew Risk asks, regarding that question, I'm asking because of a bunch of church tradition about a martyr named Marina who had Beelzebub appear to them. I am not familiar with that. If you, send me like a link to maybe an article or a book on that subject, because I have not heard of this Christian martyr before. That's interesting. He says, hold on. Andrew Risk says, hold on 1 second, sir. Baby shark, do 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 do. Oh, I better not sing that. I'll get copyrighted. YouTube's machines have no sense of fair use. You can quote, like, you could have like 2 seconds of footage, and if it's copyrighted, they won't necessarily give you a strike, but you won't be able to monetize your videos, which is fine because I'm not eligible for monetization anyway. But I'm like, really? So I don't care. But if it's there have been a couple of times where they've like blocked the video from appearing in a couple of countries, and in that case, if you've noticed on a couple of videos, there's like a big white blur because I'm just like, well, I can't be having that. I want everyone around the world to be able to see these videos. But yeah, they have no sense of the fair use doctrine because it's a computer. It's not a human making decisions. They just know copyright material, not copyright material. Hello, Hudson. Glad to have you with us. Still waiting on Andrew to get finished. I think he's typing another question. Zach Miller says, plans for the channel. I'm planning on doing a whole bunch of live streams like this one, not just for Genesis 1 to 11. I've got some talks planned on the doctrine of hell. You know, is it annihilation? Is it eternal torment? What happens to the unsaved? Not the unsaved. What happens to the unevangelized? You know, those who have never heard. What happens to infants? You know, I have a whole series planned on the doctrine of hell. It's gonna roughly closely parallel the format of my book Yahweh's Inferno: Why Scripture's Teaching on Hell Doesn't Impugn the Goodness of God, which I've got right here. It's a proof text. It's a proofreading copy, but it's going to follow that outline. It's going to be like a curriculum. That's I've got some talks planned for the doctrine of the Trinity, then the deity of Christ. I'm going to do one on the argument from contingency for God's existence. So I've just got a whole bunch of these. They're going to be like 30 in total. And when I'm done, I'm going to do a poll and ask what kind of content that you folks like. Do you like the videos that are more reminiscent of inspiring philosophy videos, or do you like these live streams? And you know, which one would you like to see more of? So for me, I like doing these live streams. In fact, and I think a lot of people like these too because it's interactive. I get to interact with you in real time. You get some good content, and also it's not nearly as involved as those inspiring philosophy-esque videos. I mean, those videos are just big, major projects, and I actually didn't have much time to read the second half of last year and the first couple of months of this year because I was so focused on making videos and putting out content consistently. Now, I am not saying that with these slides I can just throw them together in 5 minutes, but it is like 10 times less involved than all of the uploads that I've made. So I benefit from it too. I actually have time to read now and to put out good content on a consistent basis, and not go 2 or 3 months without anything. So that's my plan. I'm going to put out a lot of live streams and then have see what do you like best. I will say that analytically, these live streams have been performing better than my uploads, so I'm pleased with that. Yeah, that's great. Hudson says I like both. Good. Andrew Risk says, all right, I couldn't find the tradition because there is another Saint Marina called the Aesthetic. I have a book about it, so I will send a scan of it to you. Okay, yeah, I didn't mean do it right now. I just meant like whenever you got the chance. But yeah, that's interesting. Paranormal apparitions and stuff. They didn't stop doing stuff in the first century. They're still causing havoc. So we're going on 1 hour and 52 minutes. If anyone has any more questions, just leave them there. I think I'm going to cut it off after 2, regardless, because it's like 10. It's getting close to 10 o'clock in the evening where I am. I'm on Eastern Standard Time, and I'm going to have to get ready to go to bed. So I'll just wait a little bit, just in case anybody's typing. Beck Miller says, stuff you like to do in your free time, like outside of apologetics. Yeah, I like to watch. I like to watch anime. I like to play video games. I don't have a whole lot of time for those, but what little time I do carve out, and I do have to make the time for this stuff. But what little time I do carve out for those in the evenings, late at night, I like to watch. This year I've been watching. Well, it started since Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving Eve, after the dinner, I started watching My Hero Academia. That's a really good one. Finally got around to watching Digimon Adventure Tri and Digimon Adventure Last Evolution Kizuna. I did not like that one. That one was that one had a nonsense premise, and I don't think Last Evolution Kizuna should have been made. I rewatched the entire Digimon anime series that I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. I watched all 3 seasons of Attack on Titan, and so I've been bringing the weebishness back into my life, because I really hadn't been watching too much anime for like a few years. And currently I'm going through Naruto, which I hadn't watched when it originally ran, which was when I was a teenager. It was the mid 2000s. But I like it. I'm up to like episode 200. I'm about to watch like the third movie. After I get done with Naruto, I'm gonna watch season 5 of My Hero Academia. The English dub just came out. And then after that, I think I'm gonna rewatch Bleach. I was really into that as a teenager. And the anime is supposed to come back sometime this year to finish off the anime. The manga, the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. I don't know when. We haven't gotten much news since it was announced last year. We've just been getting small hints from the author, Taita Kubo. But once I get done with Naruto, and I've got a lot of Naruto, there's a whole bunch of episodes. I'm gonna rewatch season 5 of My Hero Academia, and then maybe Bleach, just to get prepped for the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. Hudson says Attack on Titan is so cool. Yeah, I think so too. I think it is one of the best animes ever made. Like I made this meme, like the best animes of each period of my life. Pokemon was like the best anime of my childhood. Bleach was the best anime I watched. These are the ones I watched. Pokemon for my childhood, Bleach for my teenage years, Attack on Titan, #1 anime for my 20s. It's just so good. I love it. Zach Miller, and that corresponds with Hudson's sub or dub. I prefer watching dub because I like a lot of the animes I watch have a lot of action scenes, and I can keep, I just don't like my eyes going up and down, up and down, up and down. I watch subtitles if I have to. Like with the Digimon Adventure reboot, it's not out yet, and who knows when it'll come out. Because Digimon is notorious for taking an insane amount of time for their English dubs to come out. And I just got tired of waiting, so I just started watching the sub. I did the same thing with Digimon Savers, Data Squad, back in 2006. I watched it. That was, on YouTube, back when YouTube was, they weren't cracking down on people uploading anime. But, I prefer to watch dub when it's available. If it's not available for whatever reason, either it's not available on the streaming service, or maybe it didn't get a localization, or maybe it's not out yet, I'll watch the sub. Hudson says, "Have you ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender?" No, that one is the same as Naruto. I didn't get to watch. I wasn't avoiding it, and I wasn't avoiding Naruto either. It's just like you can only watch so many television shows at once. And when I was a teenager, when these shows originally ran, like I just had too many other things to watch. But I will definitely give it a try. It looks really good. Andrew Riss says, telling someone that you like dub is like confessing Arianism to St. Nicholas. Yeah, I don't really get that. Why that's such a hot topic in the anime community. It's like, it's a preference. It's like, if you prefer subtitles, then watch subtitles. If you prefer dub, watch dub. Like, people who like dub don't have to watch subtitles, and people who like subtitles don't have to watch dub. We can just stay in our own streams, and I don't get why it's such a big argument. It's just like, what do you prefer, Coke or Pepsi? If you don't like Pepsi and you like Coke, well, no one's forcing you to drink Pepsi. Let's just drink what we like. Well, I think I'm gonna go. It's late, and this in 30 seconds from now, this video will be 2 hours long. Thank you guys for watching Cerebral Faith Live. Come back next week. We will be talking about the extent of the flood, Genesis 7 to 8. Was it a local event? Was it a global event? We will see. Thank you for watching Cerebral Faith Live. If you'd like to support this ministry, Alexa, stop.
If you haven't.
Yeah, that's going to become a meme. If you want to support this ministry financially, go to patreon.com/cerebralfaith. Thank you for watching. Peace out. God bless, and I will see you next time. And keep using the brains that God gave you.